You know every time we speak, it's no apologies. This is Wicklow Healthcare Advisory, presenting industry insiders, brought by Bill Murray. He help you in a real hurry. From ownership to healthcare, he an advocate, teaching you how to buy and sell practices. From CPAs to attorneys, all guests, here to help you with your goals. You never know who's on next. This is Wicklow Healthcare Advisory. Let's go!
Let's go! All right, everybody. Industry Insiders, episode number 7. I can't believe we made it this far. Lucky 7. And for Lucky 7, we brought on a really great person with a great company with a very boring product. There's really nothing more boring than what we're going to talk about today. But the individual we have for you today makes this product as not boring as possible. But I'll tell you, what we're talking about today, for all of you veterinarians that listen, and this also applies to dentists and medical doctors as well, but this will be a veterinarian-focused 35 or 40 minutes. We're talking about the amazing product, insurance. Insurance is not something anyone likes to talk about. Insurance is a pretty boring topic in most places, but as a business owner, it is vital to protect you, your business, your employees, and that facility and everything else. Insurance is that thing that you don't think about until you actually need it. And today's guest, I've been trying to get this individual on for months. We saw each other at VMX. We said we were going to do this, so I'm very happy to have the guy who wrote the book on veterinary insurance. Come on in, Bill Butler from Butler Veterinary Insurance.
There it is.
Here he is.
The book on veterinary insurance, protecting your veterinary practice. Yeah, I wrote the book on it because no one else wanted to because it's so boring.
Did I make it clear that I think insurance is boring? I wasn't sure if that came across.
You know, my wife, Bill, would definitely agree with you because she's heard me talk about insurance for 20 plus years now on every single topic. I'm the no fun guy. I'm like, look, I guarantee that their insurance agent doesn't know they have that Rottweiler in the front yard running around or whatever. I'm the no fun guy. So, you know, the thing with insurance though, Bill, is it's only boring until you don't need it. And then as you mentioned, once you need it, your life gets real exciting. You know, there's a lot in the news right now as we're recording this in early 25. Wildfires in California. We had hurricanes last fall. And, you know, I know 3 or 4 people personally, 3 off the top of my head, who lost homes in California. And
wow.
So, you know, their life, anything but boring when it comes to try and figure these things out. And so, you know, I would agree it can be boring if you're just going to sit down and read an insurance policy. But when you get into it and talk about protecting veterinarians or people and everything they've worked so hard for, you know, it's a passion for what we do and why I'm in this industry.
That is awesome. And I agree. I said, you know, obviously insurance is boring kind of half-heartedly. It is the least boring thing when you actually are in a situation where you need to enact your insurance policies.
Yep.
And the underinsured or uninsured, that is probably one of the worst moments they have in their professional career as an owner or as an individual. If you go through a situation and you don't have the right protections in place as a veterinarian owner of a practice, and I'm sure you've gotten those phone calls where it's like, hey, I probably needed this a month ago, but I'm making this call because I need it today.
The worst is where they actually said, nah, I don't need that.
Totally.
And then it turns out they did, because then you hear the 3 words you never want to hear an insurance professional say: you're not covered.
Yes.
And if you say you're not covered, you know, whether it's me or an adjuster, you know, that, as you said, that's a bad spot to be in. So we try and take a constant, you know, a lot of veterinarians or health professionals, you know, I know you work in some other verticals. We specialize in veterinarians, but, you know, generally this, you know, whatever we chat about today can kind of cover all medical practice business. You know, it's the consultative approach, right? It's offer everything and let the client decide what they don't want. Say, I don't want that medication. I don't want that teeth whitening. I just want the x-rays and clean my teeth. And so it's taken that approach with our clients as we've gotten into learning more about our industry and what we do to try and provide a service.
That's awesome. So listen, we'll get into some of the
Yeah.
specifics, I think, about insurance and what you do for clients, but I'd love to hear, you're a fellow entrepreneur, you own your own firm.
Yep.
Talk to me about how you entered into this industry and then how, Butler Veterinary Insurance evolved and came to be and give us a little about what you do for the veterinary profession. That would be great to hear your story.
Yeah, so I have an interesting story. Number one, no one wants to be an insurance agent. That's not like go to, career day at school. I guarantee 0 people picked insurance. Kids pick insurance. And so I had a career in the military before coming into the insurance industry. I was 12 years in the military between the National Guard and Army. This is all pre 9/11, dating myself a little bit. And did everything I want to do. There's my over here. I'm putting a point for those. I got my diploma on the wall is all my HUA badges for the Army. And so I kind of did everything I wanted to do as a 17-year-old. I went right into the military in high school and wound up as a recruiter for the Minnesota National Guard in 2001, which was my entry into sales. And so the first week of recruiter school is very sales focused. So had 3 years as a recruiter, and then I wound up joining my parents at the insurance agency that they had started a couple years earlier. So that was how I was like, what do I do? 26, high school diploma. How do I get? I don't know what I want to do. To be honest, Bill, it was path of least resistance. What can a 26-year-old guy who had a 12-year career in the military do? I'm going to go work for my parents, which is what I did.
Yeah.
And we were a generalist agency at the time. We didn't really have any sort of niche. We were primarily personal insurance focused.
Okay.
And very little commercial insurance. Just that kind of the DNA of our agency was home and auto insurance. But looking at all the successful insurance agents in my market and across the country, they really had a specialization. And so tried a couple other niches. First, I tried daycares back in 2012, 2010, 2012. But I'm a middle-aged male with no children, and that is not the target demographic to market to daycare centers. When you knock on the door at a daycare center in the middle of the day and you're not a parent, they look at you like, whose child are you here to kidnap? And honestly, that was the look. They wouldn't even open the door. They'd talk to me through the door. Who are you? Why are you
I
here?
have 2 young children, and this is a true story. It was a Sunday afternoon, 2 Sundays ago, maybe it was last Sunday, I forget. But there was a knock on the door, and I was by myself with my 2 very young children. And my dog starts barking, my kids are going nuts, and I open the door, and it was someone trying to sell me Girl Scout cookies. And she probably saw the look on my face when I was like, what could you possibly want? Right? And this is when you're doing it. My wife's not home. I'm here with the kids. My dog's running outside on the front lawn now. And I got my 2-year-old going, cookies. So like I understand that from that perspective, knocking on that door and not having the best interaction.
Yeah, so it just, I learned a lot about standing up a niche, and then had 2 years targeting chiropractor, so a different healthcare space.
Yep.
But it's for commercial insurance, that's not a real great business model for insurance agents. They generally don't own a building. Chiropractors don't have a lot of employees. So from an insurance perspective, there are not a lot of products to actually sell them,
Totally.
honestly. And, your background in lending, Bill, you probably agree they're not a heavily targeted market from a lending perspective based on a whole variety of components that go.
No offense to chiropractors,
None.
but when I was in my lending days, we would say, no, we don't finance witch doctors.
And I go see a chiropractor. My wife sees a chiropractor. Like, I love my chiropractor. However, it just from an insurance perspective, from a business model, business plan for an insurance agent to target a vertical, it wasn't a good fit for us. But again, I learned some stuff along the way. And so I had been referred one veterinary, a lot of this all starts for us in these industries with one client or whatever.
That's right.
And so I'd been referred a veterinarian back in 2014. They were a great client. They've since sold to, a corporate group, which is happening a lot. But, she earned that right to put herself in that position. But I still remember meeting with her in her basement at this old practice with a cat on an IV who is like like, you know, the typical vet story where they had like some cats in the basement that they were rehabbing and they were the practice cats and stuff. And I was just like, what am I doing? This is crazy.
Yeah.
But I had an affinity for it that for whatever reason, I just really kind of clicked with that industry as a whole. And so my wife had a health scare in 2016, kind of put everything on hold, put our lives on hold for about 9 or 10 months as she was battling cancer. Fortunately, everything's okay. But, you know, came out of that back to the insurance world and was like, okay, what now? Tried daycare, tried chiropractors. What am I do? I was like, well, I have this vet practice. You know, they seem really nice. Let's try that. And so, you know, joined the local state association. Actually, is out door knocking. Now, the problem with veterinarians is they'll let you in the door, but the veterinarians aren't available. And so, you know, they're very busy. And so I learned, okay, I got to be there between 11 and 1 if I'm going to stop by, and I may have a possible chance to even say hello to a veterinarian. And what I found, Bill, is, you know, like you said, they just, the healthcare industry is boring. They don't understand it. Business owners don't understand it. Veterinarians understand it even less. You know, I affectionately have coined the term that veterinarians are accidental entrepreneurs.
Yes.
And, you know, they didn't go to vet school to run a business. They went to vet school to be a veterinarian. And so many veterinarians wind up through either perpetuation or unhappy with their current situation and want to start their own deal after a number of years. They wind up saying, okay, I'm going to start a practice. And now all of a sudden they're entrepreneurs. They're business owners. As Michael Gerber puts in E-Myth Veterinarian, you know, they're a veterinarian bit by the entrepreneurial bug.
Right.
And so, you know, just trying to help them navigate the insurance piece, because it can be confusing, it can be boring, and it, you know, when it gets exciting, it's a real problem.
So so Butler Veterinary Insurance was kind of born out of your parents' business. You were looking for a place to go, hang your hat, make some money in your 20s. And, you know, so now you have this focus, right? It's post 2016, your wife's health is better, and you're like, okay, I really have to make a run here. And these veterinary clients that I've just happened to bump into over the years are really great people to work with. And I totally agree. I love working with veterinarians and healthcare practitioners. And I think that you said something very poignant there that I want to make sure I pick out, like the accidental entrepreneurs. I think healthcare practice owners in general, whether you're a veterinarian, a dentist, or a medical doctor, not many went to school for business, but so many end up being business owners. But veterinarians, to talk about insurance a bit, there is a lot going on in a veterinary practice that needs to be insured. So talk through like what you do for veterinarians that are owners and how you go about making sure that they are protecting themselves the right way.
Well, you know, there's a couple things that happen, Bill, and what you know, our relationships that we built with, you know, professionals like yourself across the veterinary industry. A lot of our referrals that we get, you know, veterinarians do not walk up to a booth at VMX or even the state show where we're very active in Minnesota and say, hey, I need to talk to you about insurance. Like just think about your own personal insurance. Like you don't switch insurance because it's a real pain in the butt.
No, I never.
Your agent
I've
really
had the
has
same
to
auto insurer for 20 years. I've had the same life insurance provider for 15. Like, not even a question. I just
and so
it's on auto pay. It's on auto pay. I don't even know what I'm paying at this point.
I call it the ostrich effect. You just pay your premium, stick your head in the sand, must be covered. I'm paying my premiums. And so, you know, veterinarians, business owners, healthcare professionals, I think they're in the same boat. So when it comes to, you know, veterinarians and their business, what generally happens is they're a great entry point, and where we're getting a lot of our new clients are referrals for perpetuation, acquisition, bringing in a partner, or somebody starting a practice. You know, we know a lot of the same people in the industry.
Sure.
And so some of those people are saying, hey, call Bill and his team. You're buying a practice, you're starting a practice, they'll help you out. And what happens is, coming from your prior world in lending, you know, the bank says we need XYZ. And generally XYZ is what the bank cares about, because the bank is giving you $1 million to start a practice. They want to see $1 million in coverage across, you know, the building and the business property. but they don't care if you have employment practice liability, if you're sued by an employee for wrongful termination, sexual harassment, hostile work environment. You know, I didn't get the PTO I wanted to go see, you know, a concert or whatever it might be, goofy stuff. Cyber liability, you know, so there's required insurances that your landlord's going to want to see if you're a tenant, that the bank's going to want to see. You know, some lenders have life and disability requirements.
Yep.
A lot of times what I'm seeing, you know, and I'm not going to, everyone chooses how they do business differently, but, you know, some banks say we want to see a disability policy that covers you for 12 months at 60% of the loan value. So your monthly loan is $10,000. We want to see a $6,000 benefit. We want to see 24 months of disability. However, my attitude is, if you're going to spend this, you know, you're going to spend $1,500 a year on disability insurance to cover you for 24 months. That's just to cover what the bank is asking you for.
Right.
If the bank thinks it's important enough for you to carry this for 12 months, why don't you carry that to age 67? That
Right.
seems like a pretty good idea to me. So, you know, we take that extra step, especially for, you know, acquisitions, mergers, or new practices. They're just coming in, you know, they've never owned a business before.
Totally.
Is saying, because the, you know, the
They
big picture.
They almost become reliant on the lender. And I see that today in this role, and I saw it as a lender before. It's almost like the lender is dictating to them the coverage that they need, but they're not seeing through that void of like, this is the absolute bare minimum, and this covers your lender. This has nothing to do with covering you.
Yeah.
It's about covering the bank in the event that something were to happen to you. That doesn't protect your family. It doesn't really protect you in any other way. The only thing it protects is the bank's interest in that loan getting either paid off or paid during an event that you have that enacts that policy. It is almost by definition the absolute bare minimum, and probably less than the bare minimum that an owner needs.
Yeah, and you know, it's simple things like spoilage coverage, right? I mean, we've had a couple claims that have come through where people were underinsured. We're like, hey, how much? You know, we'll put on 20,000 in spoilage coverage, and they had 40,000 in vaccines, and the fridge went out. You know, and that's a situation where, like, yeah, you have coverage, you don't have all the coverage you need. You know, we need to get this adjusted, or and most policies come with some spoilage coverage, but it's like, if you don't know the industry and to ask the question and say, how much vaccine are you carrying? How much inventory? You know, equipment breakdown, animal bailey, the interaction between your practice policy and professional liability. If you're buying it from AVMA Plit, where a lot of veterinarians buy their policy, considerations there. And so what's funny is it's not a lot of things. It's just some very specific things. You know, and I'm sure, you know, dental's the same way, health professionals the same way. There's just some uniques to that industry. And so on the insurance side of things, if a shoe store, a restaurant, you know, a contractor all come through the door on the same day, each one of those industries are going to have, they need property insurance, they need general liability insurance. You know, the bank, the tenant, the landlord, the certificate holder, whoever is going to want to see some coverage, but there's specific uniques to those industries. Well, how much contractor's equipment, if you're a contractor, do you have off premises? If you're a shoe store, how much inventory do you have in the summertime versus the wintertime? Do you need to carry as much? I don't know all those things. I know enough about it to talk intelligently, but to dive in and really understand an industry. And so, you know, working, you know, if you're a veterinarian out there, regardless of where you're buying your insurance, just work with someone in the industry or understands your industry enough to ask some questions. You know, and I don't say this to, well, okay, fine, I'll toot my own horn. I was just at our state convention after VMX. You mentioned we were at VMX, and I had a veterinarian come up. I'm on our foundation board. I was giving some remarks at the luncheon, and he goes, if I didn't know better, I'd think you're a veterinarian. You just want to find professionals who speak the way you speak and understand your industry and speak the language, whether it's, you know, Butler Vet Insurance, AVMA, you know, whoever it is out there. Because if you go, you know, and this is nothing against insurance professionals, I'm on our state insurance board, but, you know, there's risks that I probably should have no business insuring because I don't know the first thing about it. Manufacturing, I've never insured a manufacturer. And, you know, manufacturers are 25 employees or a CNC shop. I have no idea how to do that. I'm the wrong insurance agent to help you. And so finding a professional who understands your industry, understands the unique needs, and it's not a lot of stuff, Bill. You know, if the difference between what the bank is asking you to buy and what Bill Butler or Butler Vet Insurance is recommending is maybe 0.3% of your total gross revenue for the year.
Right. That's
And
the part that I think people miss on. So two things I wanted to pull out of
yeah,
that for our listeners. One is I'd never heard of spoilage insurance before, so that's kind of amazing, and it makes
banks
so
don't
much
care about
sense
spoilage, Bill.
because you're right. The electricity goes for a couple of days after a storm, and you don't have a generator up, and before you know it, $50,000 of vaccine goes. Oh,
Poof.
that's poof, gone right to the bottom line. That's great. The second thing I wanted to touch on a little bit, because this I feel like is very unique in veterinary medicine. The AVMA PLIT program, right?
Hmm.
PLIT program. I hear so many veterinarians just saying, "Oh, I go through AVMA PLIT, I go through PLIT, I go through PLIT," but might not be the best path, and certainly doesn't offer every product you need as a business owner. Maybe as an associate veterinarian, that's a great place to start
Yeah.
out. But as you grow into ownership and as you buy a building and get more staff, you really do need a professional that understands what it is your business does and how it functions to make sure that you've got the right coverages. So can you talk a little bit about how you interact with the people that use PLIT and is there like some synergies there you could talk through?
Yeah, you know, for us specific to the professional liability piece, because AVMA PLIT also does all the business insurance and all
Yep.
the, you know, life insurance and disability. So basically everything you need as a veterinarian, you can buy there. For professional liability specifically, you know, they do about 70,000 certificate policies a year for veterinarians across the U.S. So that's owners, associates, everything else.
Sure.
The biggest thing that I would say with PLIT is there's, and I don't get into the politics of, you know,
Oh, right.
veterinarians are very passionate about buying it there or not buying it there. The only reason I belong to the AVMA is to buy my PLIT. You know, I hear it all.
Sure.
And so, you know, it's just making sure that, like, if you're a practice owner and you contemplate all the things that you're doing as a veterinarian and your employees and associates are doing as a veterinarian, because, like, you know, here's a for instance. If you buy PLIT for yourself as a veterinarian and you don't buy you know, there's a number of ways to cover this, but you just want to make sure every veterinarian in your practice is carrying the same level of coverage, because you might say, all right, everyone go buy your own PLIT, I'll reimburse you. Well, one vet could buy the bare minimum without animal bailey, without license defense, and buy, you know, $100,000 policy through AVMA. You have another veterinarian for like $200 more a year, buy everything they're selling. And what you're doing is you're doing a disservice to your staff, because techs can't buy professional liability insurance. Don't buy veterinary liability insurance. They get their coverage under the veterinarian who's the one prescribing the care and making all the clinical decisions. So exam room 1, Bill Butler has $1 million policy. Exam room 2, Bill Murray's cheap and he buys the cheapest policy they have. So certified vet tech goes in exam room with Bill Butler. They have $1 million in coverage. They go into exam room 2. All of a sudden the protection for that vet tech drops. And so one simple thing you can do as a veterinarian, every vet, if your veterinarians in your practice are talking about that or buying their own policies, set a minimum limit. Kind of like pizza delivery drivers. If you're going to be a pizza delivery driver for Domino's, you got to have a minimum level of coverage for professional liability. And then, you know, one thing, so then an additional component to that is you're providing the same level of protection across the board. If you're an associate working at a practice who buys their coverage through their insurance policy, and the veterinarian says, you don't need to buy a policy because you're covered under ours, but you do volunteer work. You volunteer to do spay neuters. You probably want to go out and buy your own professional policy out of your own pocket, even though, because that practice policy is not covering your volunteer work as a veterinarian somewhere else, because it's not under, you know, Bill Butler veterinary practice in Apple Valley, Minnesota. So there's just some uniques in there. You know, I talk about it in the book, and again, working with an insurance professional to make sure, hey, you know, an AVMA PLIT can give you this advice on this stuff too, but just I've seen it a number of times where you've got, you know, 6 vets at a practice and all 6 of them have different levels of coverage.
Totally. I never thought of that, and that's a great point. Also, like, you know, you might want to do relief work. You might have an associate position, but you want to go help out a friend and do some relief work for them while they're on vacation for a week. Those are things that I think people just don't even think about, and they just go and do it, and then before you know it, there's an incident. and you find out, well, your policy's not covering you for that because you were getting it through your associate position. That's very interesting.
One
Let's
point that you one point that
yeah,
you made, Bill, about the banking and the bank saying, "Hey, this is what we need," and veterinarians relying on that. The other thing that happens is, Bank of America gives you a loan, you buy $300,000 worth of equipment, you insure $300,000 of equipment because that's how much they told you had to buy. 2 years on, you've bought an additional $250,000 in equipment as you've expanded your practice.
that's
You
right.
haven't added that coverage to your insurance policy. And so, regular checkups, if you buy anything over $10,000, even if you're paying cash for it, call your insurance agent, please. This is
That's
the
right.
public service announcement. Whenever you're buying anything of a value with 5 numbers in front of it, you need to call your insurance agent, whoever they are, wherever they are, providing insurance for your practice. Let your practice manager know, hey, we need to review our coverage because it probably hasn't been reviewed. And, we can send out 50 emails saying, hey, did you buy any equipment? But if you don't respond to them, I have no idea that you bought a brand new X-ray or cold laser, whatever it might be.
And and it's funny, and you see this a lot with lab because the laboratory companies, the IDEXs and Antechs of the world subsidize so much of their equipment
Yep.
that they feel like they're getting it for free. But that needs to be insured too, because if you lose that, it's not just getting replaced right away. There's a
No.
cost to that replacement. Very interesting talk, and I love talking about it because the veterinary. It's right. Like whoever you talk to in Minnesota that said this, you sound like a veterinarian. You sound like you own a veterinary hospital. That's how good you are at
Well, I
understanding what
just
these
talked to a lot of
coverages and what these
veterinarians.
pitfalls are. And again, it's to the point about the lenders and saying, well, the bank wants me to get $300,000 in insurance. That's for the equipment. What about cabinets and furniture and fixtures? What if you had a catastrophic event in your hospital where it flooded, or there was a fire,
Yep.
or there was a huge issue with the building that damaged not just some of the equipment that's there? You want to be able to get replacement costs for all of those items that are there. I've seen it a lot of times where the insurance coverage only covers those hard, very large pieces of equipment in a practice, but there's a lot of other things that go into that build out that cost a lot of money that they're not insuring.
Empty every drawer and cabinet at a vet practice and then total all that up.
That's right. That's
And
right.
that number is going to get real big real fast. Talking about IDEX for especially for startups, right? Because these companies are giving away $50, $80, $120,000 worth of equipment. Brand new practice owner, or even if you're an existing practice owner and you're upgrading your equipment, they say, here's 80 grand worth of equipment. If that equipment is not free, IDEX will not replace that or whatever, name the manufacturer, name the lab
Right.
company. IDEX is probably the leader out there right now. And that's the only reason I'm mentioning them is that's what
Sure.
I'm running into with a lot of my practices. Bank says, here's $200,000 to buy equipment. IDEX gives you $80,000 in free equipment. The bank doesn't care about how much coverage do you need, Bill? The answer is probably 300 grand.
Yeah.
And
How much do you need, or how much does the bank require? The bank's
Yeah.
going to require 200, and you need 350 most likely. That's
yeah.
right.
And so, it's those simple things like that, again, veterinarians don't, and this isn't, just what happens, right? Because you don't think about it until something happens.
And you truly don't know any better until you actually walk through. I like the open the drawer comment. Like until you actually walk through a veterinary practice and open every drawer and look at every piece of equipment and see what the true replacement value is for all of this stuff, you realize very quickly, wow, if something were to happen, I'm well underinsured, and I'm
Yeah.
going to be writing a check personally for $150,000 to get this place to exactly what it was before the incident happened. That's very, very interesting.
I mean, just to throw out a broad number, right? So across the veterinary practices, we insure from solo practitioners in their car doing in-home euthanasias, all the way up to multi-location, 8 vet practices, 3+ million in revenue, which is on the higher side for kind of a private practice.
Sure.
Average premium's $12,500. I mean, that's the average premium across our, all the veterinarians that we work with across North America. And we're a national program. We're currently licensed in about 30 states. There's some states we don't want to try and play in. I mentioned California wildfires, and there's some states with some regulatory stuff, but we try and be as much of a national service provider as we can. $12,500. If you look at your bottom line as a veteran, that's one and a half, 1 3/4 veterinarians revenue, gross revenue is going towards your business insurance stuff. And so again, if you want to cut corners and buy just what the bank's offering and everything else, you're going to save about $4,000 or $5,000 a year.
And it could cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars in an incident. Yeah.
The average
when it's described like that, it truly is a no-brainer, and it's more about just having someone like you kind of point that out. Like, hey, what if this were to happen? Because insurance is all about that what if moment. What if this were to happen to you? Are you prepared to write this size of a check, or do you have the right coverage where it's going to be a non-issue? Really great point.
Well, a question that I ask a lot of veterinarians is, well, do you want to pay for that, or do you want insurance to pay for that?
Sure. 100%.
Do you want the insurance company to buy your new IDEX machines when the building burns down, or do you want to pay for? Well, I don't want to pay for those. Okay, well, we need to add 80,000 in coverage, and it's $60 a year.
That's
okay,
right.
Great.
That's whatever. $60 you've ever spent if that incident ever does happen. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Let's shift gears for a moment. You work with, you see a lot, like you said, national company, licensed in 30 states. You work with a lot of first-time owners that are doing this for the first time. What are, 2 pieces of advice you give to those first-time practice owners that are buying a practice, they're walking into a full-service business, doing $1 million in revenue? What are some of the pieces of advice you give to those people that you're talking to regularly?
I think just an honest, open conversation with the insurance professional that they're dealing with of what they want out of that relationship. That's one of the first questions that we ask, Bill, is what do you want out of a relationship with an insurance professional, whether it's us or anyone else, right?
Sure.
What are the ground rules? And so as a brand new business owner, hey, these are my expectations. I expect you to give me advice on what I should have. I expect you to, tell me if there's something that I should be buying that I'm not buying. And, is this the best value to protect the practice? Because, for a brand new veterinary practice owner, they're walking in, signing a big promissory note to a bank or to the seller. And they're really putting their family's livelihood on the line for the next 10 to 20 years about, betting on them in this scenario. And so working with someone with their best interests. So, I think it's building, I have a podcast we talk about on my podcast, is building a good team and just being comfortable with the professional that they're going to give you the best advice, whether that's AVMA PLIT, other professional, the local insurance agent might be the best option for you based on your locality. If you're on the beach in Florida, you should find a Florida insurance agent who knows the market, honestly.
That's right.
And so, that I think working with, it's not about coverage, it's about working with a professional that has your best interests at heart. I think every industry has those individuals who are like, hey, here's the lowest price. This is the best deal. Insurance is you get what you pay for, really. And then, the second component is just look at everything. Say, am I covered for everything that could potentially happen at my practice? From an employee perspective, from a claims perspective, we don't sell a lot of earthquake insurance in Minnesota where I am. But, if I'm working in the Pacific Northwest or maybe Rhode Island, some of these different conversations come up. As it comes to employees, employment practice liability coverage, that's a big coverage we don't see a lot of, or they're buying very low coverage, like 50, an insurance agent will just put $50,000 on a policy. Average claim is 80. Wow. And so, I had coverage, but I was underinsured by 30 grand for an employee saying, I'm suing you. So
it's true. It's so often that we see, it's like, well, I have insurance, but the underinsured is where the real issues pop up, I'm assuming, right? So when those incidents do happen, it's like, well, I had insurance, but you didn't have enough. You had $400,000 in equipment and cabinetry. You had a policy for 200 grand and you never updated it. And you're writing a check for 200,000 for all those replacement costs.
Or you're trying to get by with 200 grand and trying to get restarted.
And what I also appreciated that you said is all about team, right? You got to put the team around you, right? And when you are an associate moving into ownership, I think we talk a lot about on this podcast, it's about building out the right team and making sure you have an expert for every situation. You've got a bank that understands what you're trying to accomplish. You've got an attorney and CPA who understands veterinary industry, and then an insurance agent that can come in and say, hey, this is going to protect you in the event any of these things happen, and these are the right coverages for you. That's fantastic. Well, Bill, I mean, I could probably talk to you for another hour about insurance, right? I mean, I literally could, but this is the Wicklow podcast Industry Insiders, and I'd love to hear about, your Wicklow. What is your retirement dream like? So when you think about, the next evolution of Butler Vet Insurance and you may be making that exit yourself, where do you see yourself and your family in that retirement story?
Well, I'll share a personal message to everyone out there. So, as I mentioned, my wife earlier had cancer in 2016. She had a stage 4 diagnosis. It was very dire for the first half of 2016. It was not an awesome time.
Sure.
And when my wife was as sick as she possibly was, near death a couple times, and I said, well, if you make it out of this, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? And she thought for a second and she said, live in the south of France. And I said, okay, what's number 2? And she looked at me like, what are you saying? And I was like, well, I mean, look, I'm a successful guy, but like, let's be honest for a second. And I said, what's number 2? And she said, well, garden and go to the cabin. And her parents have a cabin and she loves gardening. And I said, okay, but I've been looking at houses in the south of France, Bill. Nothing to do with politics or anything going on. I've been looking at this for like 2 or 3 years now. You can buy like a 1,500 square foot, 2-bed, 2-bath house in the south of France for like $400,000.
Wow.
And a cabin in northern Minnesota is going for like $600,000. So
maybe option 1 is the better option now, right?
Absolutely.
You just have to wait it out. You just have to wait it out for the number 1 option to become the number 1 option. That's
correct.
That's
so my wife majored in French. She loves France. We've taken some trips there. We really enjoy Europe. And just, travel, but then also giving back. Like I'm passionate about entrepreneurship. As I mentioned, I have a high school diploma. I'm passionate about giving back to the VBMAs. I'm going to speak at Mizzou this spring. I'm going to speak at Iowa State. Awesome. That's planting seeds, but also it's just like, hey, if at some point you're going to own a veterinary practice, like I try and give my book to veterinary students, like just learn a little bit about business. So when you jump into this thing, so, trying to help out the industry and entrepreneurs, because I came in, I now own my agency. I bought out my parents. I had no clue what I was doing when I started. I'm my own accidental entrepreneur.
Totally.
17-year-old Bill Butler was not a future insurance agency owner.
So future insurance agency owner was not the 17-year-old plan for 17-year-old Bill Butler?
No, he would have punched 49-year-old Bill Butler in the face for mentioning it. So knowing 17-year-old Bill Butler, I'm a little more calm now, but yeah, so south of France travel, and then just, maybe some consulting. And I love being active and out helping people. So something in that realm. I'm active in Rotary. I don't know.
Well, Bill, I mean, we met a couple years ago now, and I will say this, you are one of the great stewards of the veterinary profession and the veterinary industry. You really do mean what you say. When you talk about giving back and being involved and being an expert and being very giving of the information that you have in the Bill Butler brain about insurance and how to protect yourself, you really do a great job. I know you're active in Minnesota, active nationally, and it's always a pleasure to see you and see how great you and the Butler Veterinary Insurance team are doing and what you guys are doing to support the veterinary industry. So thank you for that. And for any of the listeners out there that want to reach out to you, if you could just give kind of the website, we'll make sure it's on the end card. But for those listening, just how would someone get a hold of Butler Veterinary Insurance if they wanted to talk to you about the amazing topic of insuring your veterinary practice?
Best place to go is butlervetinsurance.com. Otherwise, it's Bill Butler -CIC, which is Certified Insurance Counselor. There's another Bill Butler out there, so I threw that on LinkedIn. So Bill Butler -CIC on LinkedIn, or butlervetinsurance.com, and our contact information's there. So if anyone has an insurance question, I'm happy to answer it.
Awesome. Well, Bill, this was a great conversation about a tough topic, but a great topic. And again, I think one of the takeaways that I have today is just, when you're prepared for that event and you're insured the right way, you can work through that moment of craziness and stress and get through it and get on the right side of that with financially unscathed. And that's what insurance does. So thank you for the conversation today. It was great to see you and have you on. That's it. Episode 7, Industry Insiders in the books. Appreciate you listeners. Thank you, Bill Butler, for coming on, and we'll see you out there. Talk soon.
Was it good?
You know every time we speak it's no apologies. This is Wicklow Healthcare Advisory, presenting industry insiders, brought by Bill Murray. He help you in a real hurry. From ownership to healthcare, he an advocate, teaching you how to buy and sell practices. From CPAs to attorneys, all guests here to help you reach your goals. You never know who's on next. This is Wicklow Healthcare Advisory. Let's go.